a story that I would like to share with you. And then out of that, as a consequence of that, I want to share with you a bit of a speech that President Obama gave last week. And the essential story is one that I've shared with you before, and that is the story of Milton Mayer. And you know, basically, and they thought they were free is the essential. That's the title of the book. And I want to just read to you just a little background story here. In 1955, this book was published by University of Chicago Press. It was called "They Thought They Were Free" by Milton Mayer. Milton Mayer was a newspaper man out of Chicago. He traveled in the very late 1940s, early 1950s. I'm not sure the exact year. He traveled to Germany. He spent a year in Germany. During that year, he became very, very close to 10 Germans who, none of whom were members of the military, none of whom have fought in the war, all of whom lived through Germany in the workplace throughout the 30s and early 40s. And his question to them was, how could you, as a citizen, as a voter, as an employee, how could you have let this thing happen? This Nazi thing. How did you let it happen? And I want to just read a couple of paragraphs from what these ex-Nazis, I mean, you know, I refer to them as Nazis. You had to pretty much join the Nazi party if you wanted to be able to get a job, just like, you know, you had to be in the Ba'ath Party in Iraq if you wanted to have a job. It wasn't quite that rigorous, but, you know, several of them had joined the party. That's not what it was all about. But I just want to read to you the comments of a couple of these Nazis about how Nazism took over Germany, and then I want to play a clip from President Obama from last week. So listen to this first. One said, "What happened here was the gradual habituation of the people, little by little, to being governed by surprise." Now, I got to tell you, you know, day before yesterday, I was laying in bed. It was bedtime, right? It was like, you know, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. I was getting ready to go to sleep, and I had my phone and I was reading. I read novels mostly, and you know, to read myself to sleep. I read nonfiction and write nonfiction for a living, and so I'd been reading this novel by Robert Parker, and I decided, you know, I thought, well, I need to check the New York Times before I go to sleep, just in case Trump's tweeted something stupid, right? I mean, that's where we're all at, right? We're compulsively checking the news because we're being governed by surprise. Okay, anyhow, back to what the Nazis said. What happened here was the gradual habituation of the people, little by little, to being governed by surprise, to receiving decisions deliberated in secret, to believing that the situation was so complicated that the government had to act on information which the people couldn't understand, or so dangerous that even if the people could understand it, it couldn't be released because of national security. This separation of government from people, this widening of the gap took place so gradually, so insensibly, each step disguised, perhaps not even intentionally, as a temporary emergency measure, or associated with true patriotic allegiance or with real social purpose. And all the crises and the reforms, and real reforms too, so occupied the people they did not see the slow motion underneath of the whole process of government growing remoter and remoter. To live in this process is absolutely not to be able to notice it. Please try to believe me, unless one has a much greater degree of political awareness, acuity than most of us ever had the occasion to develop. Each step was so small, so inconsequential, so well explained, or on occasion regretted, that unless one were detached from the whole process from the beginning, unless one understood that what the whole thing was in principle, what all these little measures that no patriotic German could resent must someday lead to, no more saw it developing from day to day than a farmer in the field sees the corn growing, and one day it's over his head. And he says, this is basically how it all he says, you wait for the one great shocking occasion. This was a university professor. He says, German, who lived through the Nazis. He said, you wait for the one great shocking occasion, thinking that others, when such a shock comes, will join you in resisting somehow. I would, let me step out of his speech right now and just say, I would say right now, the one great shocking occasion that a lot of Americans are expecting and waiting for is Trump firing Mueller. And they think, oh, then millions of people are going to come in the streets, right? Bruce Bartlett blogging about this, others blogging about this. Don't count on it. Okay, back to what the Nazis said about Germany in the 1930s. You wait for the one great shocking occasion, thinking that others, when such a shock comes, will join you in resisting somehow. You don't want to act or even talk alone. You don't want to go out of your way to make trouble. Why not? Well, you're not in the habit of doing it. And it's not just fear of standing alone that restrains you. It's also genuine uncertainty. Uncertainty is a very important factor. And instead of decreasing as time goes on, it grows. Outside in the streets, everyone's happy. One hears no protest, certainly sees none. You know, in France or Italy, there's slogans against the government painted on walls and fences. But in Germany, outside the great cities, perhaps, there's not even this. In the university community, in your own community, you speak privately to your colleagues, some who certainly feel as you do. But what do they say? They say, it's not so bad. You're seeing things. You're an alarmist. And you are an alarmist. That's the difficulty. If the last and worst act of the whole regime had come immediately after the first and smallest, thousands, yes, millions would have been sufficiently shocked if, let us say, the gassing of the Jews in '43 came immediately after the German firm stickers on the windows of non-Jewish shops in '33. But of course, this isn't the way it happens. In between come all the hundreds of little steps. And one day, too late, your principles, if you were ever sensible of them, all rush in upon you. The burden of self-deception has grown too heavy, and some minor incident, in my case, my little boy, hardly more than a baby, saying, Jew swine, collapses it all at once. And you see that everything has changed, and changed completely under your nose. The world you live in, your nation, your people, is not the world you were in at all. The forms are all there, all untouched, all reassuring. The houses, the shops, the jobs, the mealtimes, the visits, the concerts, the cinema, the holidays. But the spirit, which you never noticed because you made the lifelong mistake of identifying with the forms, the spirit is changed. And now you live in a world of fear and hate. And people who hate and fear don't even know it themselves. Here is President Obama speaking to this issue last week.
We get complacent and assume that things continue the way they have been, just automatically, and they don't. You have to tend to this garden of democracy, otherwise things can fall apart fairly quickly. And we've seen societies where that happens, right? Now, presumably there was a ballroom here in Vienna in the late 1920s or 30s that looked pretty sophisticated and seemed as if, with the music and the art and the literature and the science that was emerging, it would continue into perpetuity. And then 60 million people died. And an entire world was plunged into chaos. So, you gotta pay attention and vote.
Yeah, but the spirit, which you never noticed because you made the lifelong mistake of identifying it with the forms, is changed. Now you live in a world of hate and fear, and the people who hate and fear don't even know it themselves. When everyone is transformed, no one is transformed. Now you live in a system which rules without responsibility, even to God, said Milton Mayer's ex-Nazi friend. So